It's everything, this breath inside of me. Question everything I once believed. Question everything, so I can't see the story's just a dream.
So thanks for being with me this evening. I'm Dave Smith, and wanted to talk tonight about a concept that's been around for a while. So I don't think it's anything new, but the concept in the work is Buddhist recovery, and integrating these two worlds together, which has been going on for actually many decades, truth be told, and then people bringing Kevin Griffin bringing the world of 12 steps into recovery, and some people after that, and recently refuge recovery and recovery dharma. And one of the things that I've learned over the last, really since COVID, is that people who are interested in this kind of work and doing this kind of stuff are feeling a little frustrated and disappointed that um, the current world of Buddhist recovery is not really great. People aren't really getting what they need and finding. Uh, One of the things people ask me when I take people once in a while, they say, "I'm really interested in stuff, but I actually don't know what I would be doing. Like, what if I was doing Buddhist recovery? What would I actually be doing?" Um, so I have had many months at home, as many of you have, thinking about this stuff, and um, me and my wife Shannon have been working on this program, and thought now would be a good time to do something online because we're all online. And I really wanted to not create a program, um, like you would think about a recovery program, like a 12-step program or a clinical program, but actually more like really a class, an educational class, um, and looking at the going rewinding all the way back to the beginning of the tape and looking at what is in the earliest teachings of Buddhism, what's in the pages of the Pali Canon. And one thing that has been kind of been haunting me for, oh God, decades now is, many of you know, I mean, I'm actually in recovery too. I should say that probably helps. You know, I've been recovering from drug and alcohol addiction, and really recently mostly realizing that trauma was sort of the big culprit here. Um, but when I first got sober in 2003, I sat the 60-day, or not the 60-day, the 90-day retreat, the 3-month retreat at IMS with 60 days of sobriety, which was no picnic. Um, and at the last day of the retreat, they did a big Q&A session, and I was there. Joseph Goldstein had taught the retreat, as he usually does. And I asked him very seriously, I said, did the Buddha ever say anything about addiction? You know, like what would be a Buddhist teaching on this idea? And he offered me a couple kind of vague concepts. He talked about fetters and the hindrances and so forth. And then he paused for a while, and he looked up at me, and he very thoughtfully, and he said, actually, you know, the whole of the Dharma is about breaking free from addiction. The whole work that we're doing here is trying to overcome this tendency to become addicted. And so I think really from a Buddhist perspective, every human being has some addiction in their system. But people who struggle with sort of quote unquote classic addiction, whether it's a drug addiction is sort of the most common one, that's the one that goes back the furthest, but now we see process addiction. And people essentially in the modern world can become essentially addicted to anything. Um, that I wanted to create something that was specifically designed for that kind of population, because I think it's safe to say that people with addiction do suffer in a unique way, and that there's a universal experience that can be shared and that can be talked about and discussed, and can really uh, the shared humanity, the compassion of shared humanity of a shared experience can really help bring people together. So I figured we're on Zoom, we're online. I made a class, and a community for that will meet on Zoom. I'll talk more about that at the end. And of course, if you have questions, and we will have time for that. So we'll do a practice here in a little bit, and then I'll kind of walk you through. I'll kind of deconstruct my thinking on this, and we can just kind of chop it up a little bit. So I appreciate y'all being here, and we'll probably start. But to kind of get more into this topic of Buddhist recovery, I guess there's so many things I could say, but I want to talk about things from a very. I want to use some terms and some ideas that are always in the room when we're talking about Buddhism, or really for me, Dharma practice. And that is, first of all, I think it's important that we understand what Buddhist liberation actually is. We talk, so there's lots of words you could say liberation, we could say freedom, we could say awakening, we could say enlightenment, we could say equanimity. There's all these words that are speaking to that experience. And to me, even wisdom, to me, those are also words that are speaking to what I understand as recovery. This way of being in the world that feels constructive and supportive. But when we look at what's called in academic sense is the study of soteriology. Soteriologist means the study of salvation. So different religions, different philosophies, different systems have a soteriology. Even AA has a soteriology. But when we look at it, there's actually two ways in which early Buddhism talks about it. And I think it's important that we understand this. One of them is liberation through wisdom, which is Panya Vimutti, which is the one that most of us are familiar with. And then there's another one that's also talked about that doesn't really get the airtime it deserves, which is Chitta Vimutti. And they're both seen as different paths to liberation. Liberation through wisdom, liberation through the heart. And I think that the danger with liberation through wisdom is, I think a lot of us come into recovery, or we come into Buddhism, and we think there's something that I just don't know. And if I knew it, then that would mean something. So like, I need to know something. And if I had the information, then that would like mean I would be happier, I wouldn't suffer anymore, or whatever we think, right? And so we're really, as Western mind, English speaking people, we're really kind of hooked into that idea, which for me hasn't actually been that helpful. Like, for example, I knew I was an alcoholic the whole time I drank. It didn't help me get sober. I knew that like smoking crystal meth out of a light bulb was like not a great idea. Like I knew that, but knowing that didn't actually help me not do it. Right. And so I think that when we're struggling with addiction, we don't need to know that. We actually need to know how. I need to know how to do this thing. And when we look at this, which is a much more of a lay practitioner path, I think, because what happened in the Buddhist tradition is wisdom sort of became the monastic order. You give up on the world, you put on the brown robes, you don't have sex, you don't have money, you don't engage in hedonic pleasure, and you dedicate yourself to this Dharma path. And that's really kind of meets what the wisdom path is, which I'm not going to do. Um, so I'm stuck with this liberation through the heart, which is really kind of the way that we do that is actually through the development of the Brahma Viharas. So I feel like when we're doing a Buddhist recovery model, I think that, and I'll put my flag in the sand on this one. I think that for most people, I never like to say always, I think that for most of us, if we're using Buddhism in a recovery sense, we really want to understand that this is probably going to be a liberation through the heart practice, a liberation through relationships, the relationships that we have with ourselves, the relationship that we have with others, our relationship to our culture, our relationship to money, seeing actually Dharma practice and Dharma work as just an ongoing relationship that we want to kind of get the most out of. And so this word vimutti, which is the kind of Pali word for liberation, it means like liberation, it means deliverance. In some senses, it means release. In some senses, it means emancipation. And so, which that actually brings me to this idea of freedom, because emancipation is being free from some kind of bondage, if you will. And I think when I think about freedom, I want to be, and we use this word a lot in recovery rooms, being free from addiction, being free from the craving of addiction, the causes of addiction, is that there's two sides to the coin of freedom that I don't think always get acknowledged. So there's being free from something. Like I want to be free from craving. I want to be free from clinging. I want to be free from greed, hatred, and confusion. I want to be free from resentment. I want to be free from these things. But then I think the heavy lifting for me has been like, well, if I do that, then what am I free to? So there's freedom from something, and there's freedom to something. What am I free to do? right? And so, most of us in our English thinking, speaking, Western American minds think that we just want to be free to do whatever we want without any consequences. Let's be honest, right? I want to be able, I want an Black Amex card where I'm free to buy anything I want and do whatever I want. But I think when we start to um, understand this concept of freedom, one of the things I think that really gets in the way, and this is sort of my pushback on the Buddhist tradition as somebody who's struggled with these ideas for decades, is at some point, probably sooner than later, you're going to come across the idea that Dharma practice is about being free from suffering once and for all, right? The path that leads to the end of suffering. And if you look at the standard understanding of the Four Noble Truths, is what you get this, the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the end of suffering, the truth of the path that leads to the end of suffering. That's in 95% of the books on the shelf behind me. And when you start looking at what the Buddha said, that's actually not what's being said. So and so for me, uh, my addiction, my using drugs and alcohol and a whole bunch of other things that go along with that kind of lifestyle, um, addiction was all about trying to end suffering. I wanted to. I was always trying to avoid something inside of me that felt wrong or bad or too much or too hard. And so I think that for people with addiction, the thing that's dangerous, I think is the word I would use, is that if we think that Buddhism is about ending suffering, now I'm just using Buddhism to develop the same strategy that I was using addiction for. And you can find yourself just sort of being frustrated and disappointed because now if I am suffering, which I suffer every day, I'll be honest with you, now I'm doing Buddhism wrong. Now I'm actually, if I was doing this right, uh, if I was doing this freedom thing right, I would be free from this thing called suffering. And I think I don't think that's actually what the Buddha was saying at all, first of all. And I think for a lot of us, that can be very, very dangerous. So I think we have to be clear about what it is that we're trying to be free from. And so I don't think we're trying to be free from dukkha. Um, I think we're trying to be free from reactivity. We're trying to really not be free from dukkha, but we're trying to be free from uh, craving and tanha and clinging and reactivity and all of these words. The second noble truth, as you probably know it. That's the heavy lifting of addiction. To me, actually, tanha, uh, samuda, kanda upadana, all these kind of words that are like attachment and clinging and craving and all these kind of Buddhist words. It's just another way to say addiction. So the second noble truth, actually, to me, when Goldstein said that, I think what he was talking about is like we're trying to be free from our reactivities. We're trying to be free from, actually, I would argue, I'm trying to be free from my destructive relationship to dukkha. The fact that life is hard. I have to deal with my own aging, my own sickness, my own death, that of my loved ones, which brings up a lot of fear and sadness. I have to understand that I don't always get what I want. Sometimes I get what I don't want. I'm separated from the things that I care about. I come into contact with the things that I don't want to deal with. This is the way that he talks about dukkha. And so the reason why I think this Chitta Vimutti path is really a good path for us is the first truth, the truth of dukkha, the truth of life being hard, is not a prompt to break through that through some like cognitive philosophical understanding. But to me, it feels like a prompt for compassion. To me, the first noble truth isn't about suffering at all. It's about compassion. It's about caring about myself. It's about taking care of myself. It's about taking care of other people. It's about being willing to feel the ouch of my life in a way that's not destructive. And even the Buddha said this, right? After he had his awakening, he's walking around, he's thinking about this Dharma that he's reached and that he's come to understand. And what's he going to do about it? Is he going to teach it to other people, or is he just going to keep it to himself? and he's, in his mind, in this one sutta, he's talking about what he awoke to was so difficult and so hard to acknowledge, to come to terms with our own humanity, that actually he wasn't going to teach it originally because he thought people aren't going to want to hear this. People want, what do people want? We want certainty, we want consolation, we want heaven, we want to be guaranteed that shit's going to be okay. And of course, religion is in the business of offering this for us, right? But the Buddha's not offering that at all. And so he says to himself, he goes, well, out of compassion, this word anukampa, which is the other word for compassion, out of an acknowledgement of the suffering of the world, I will teach the Dharma, because there will be some people will get this. Some people will understand this and will actually be willing to do the hard work that this entails. And I really like this reflection because to some degree, I feel like he's speaking to me. Uh, I feel like he's speaking to us. I don't know if you guys are all have an addiction in your world, but if you're in recovery from drugs and alcohol, I certainly feel your pain. But I think one thing that I've noticed as a teacher and somebody who's worked in addiction treatment, I've read a lot of students over the years. I have a huge roster of students in my mentoring program. The students that do really, really well that I work with are mostly the students that have addiction, because they got a lot of skin in the game. They're like, oh, because we've tasted, we've experienced what happens when we develop a destructive relationship to dukkha, when we develop this dysfunctional relationship to, as they say, life on life's terms. I don't want to do life on life's terms. I want to do life on my fucking terms. And so when you get a sense for how much you can destroy your life when you actually become corrupted by the forces of greed, hatred, and confusion, you can really get a good fire lit under your ass to be like, all right, man, I'm going to do this thing. And I think that when we look at it from this liberation through the heart perspective, it feels a lot more in line with my sense of humanity. In fact, to some degree, it's like I'm not trying to end suffering, honestly. I'm just trying to get like kind of good at it. And getting pretty good at it. I got to tell you, it doesn't even really bother me anymore. I'm just like, oh God, this happened. I'm gonna have to suffer about this for a couple hours. I'm just gonna do it. It's just so much easier, to go this way. So when we look at kind of the way these ideas are laid out, is that the four truths are kind of back asswards, where when we look at, if we look at the third noble truth, so life is difficult, right? We know that life is hard. Addiction is what I do to try to avoid, change, and control, and try to manage dukkha, which clearly doesn't work. When I stop doing that, I start to experience this third truth, which is like liberation, which is Nibbana, awakening, enlightenment, equanimity. There's like 10 terms that we come across in Buddhism, but they're all pointing to the same thing, this experience of Nibbana, which is it's not the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, because traditionally it would say if you cultivate the Eightfold Path, it leads to Nibbana, right? That's kind of what it says. But actually, that's not what it says. It says actually from Nibbana, when I'm free from this reactivity, when I'm free from this addiction, I'm free to live the life that I want to live. I'm free to cultivate the Eightfold Path. I'm free to, I have access to the life that I've always wanted to have. I'm able to do the things that I want to do. I'm able to stop doing the things I no longer want to do. And I engage the world from a perspective. I can actually start to imagine the life that I want to have. I can start to find my speech, my voice. I'm able to actually voice that to other people and to myself. I'm able to voice the life that I want to have. I'm able to take on work and to live and to be in the world and to engage in the world in a way that respects and values what I want to have for myself, because I can imagine that. Nibbana is the ground in which I'm able to do that from. The path doesn't lead me to Nibbana. Nibbana or recovery, I would even say. I would use recovery and Nibbana synonymously. No problem for me to do that. When I'm in a recovered state of experience, I do well. I can have a meaningful life. I can do the things that I want to do. And so I think when we and then now when I'm in this conversation, now suffering's like it's just kind of like not really a big deal anymore. It's not my ultimate concern anymore. Because the problem with a lot of people when they come into Buddhism, in fact, if you look at the way people study religion, there's a Christian scholar named Paul Tillich who says his definition of religion is that which we're most ultimately concerned about. My ultimate concern, when I lay my head down at the pillow at the end of the day, what is it that my ultimate concern is? That's kind of what my religion is in a very kind of pragmatic sense. And if my ultimate concern is suffering, then I'm just like, it just becomes, I'm always just worried about that. And it's not so much that craving or reactivity causes suffering, which clearly it does to some degree, but I like to think about it as more as it's blocking me. My addiction causes me suffering, sure, but what really does the heavy lifting for me is my addiction is blocking me from having the life that I want to have. It's blocking me from being able to imagine the life that I want to have. It's blocking me from being able to voice to myself and to other people the kind of life that I want to have. It's holding me back. It's in some philosophical senses, you probably heard of Mara, this figure that the Buddha kind of encounters. Mara literally means in the Pali translations, the one who creates limits. It's that limited part of your mind. Well, I can't do this because, and I better not do because, and the way in which we don't allow ourselves to go back to school and to get that degree or take that job that doesn't pay good, but it's something that's really meaningful to us. It's these limits that we create for ourselves that are very, very destructive. So as much as we can say, I have no problem saying that this craving, this reactivity, this tana, it does cause me some suffering for sure. But I think the bigger issue is what is it keeping me from doing? And people in recovery know this very, very well. Is that most people, that's why we love to go to meetings. It's like the ultimate transformation of the narrative. I'm this like loser piece of shit who can't get my life together to being this like the stories, the same story. It's got the same story. It's like the Joseph Campbell on steroids. It's the greatest story ever told. The overcoming of the big, that which ails us, the overcoming of that. And that's a really great story. So I think this overemphasizing and this kind of focus on this whole suffering thing is really just kind of a bit of a problem. So I try to think of when I could become free from this kind of reactivity, this kind of addiction, this kind of actually really dysfunctional relationship to the fact that my life is hard, that things haven't always gone my way, a bunch of shit's gone down I wish didn't go down. And if I just can't let that stuff go, it just kind of holds me back. And so when we get in this, so I would say like uh, when we talk about nibbana or awakening or enlightenment or equanimity or sometimes the deathless, there's all these words. I think that we could actually just use the word recovery. I think we could just add that to the list if we're integrating these practices together. And then of course, we're never done. You're never done. You're never recovered. You're never fully awakened. That we have to understand that there's no there. There's no destination. There's no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. There's no yellow ribbon we go running through. We just actually get better. And that's the thing about the term meditation that's always troubled me is that really what we're looking for is this word cultivation. I'm trying to cultivate a lifestyle for myself by being able to not be so caught up in these addictive patterns of my own mind, by being able to be in this kind of space of recovery or this space of ease. And now I can imagine what I want for myself. I can imagine the life that I want to have. I can move through the world with that. I can put voice to that. I can just kind of, it's a buzzword. I don't like to use it because I can't think of another one, but it's really kind of this what they, everybody uses the word authenticity now. Or in some settings, I see Mace just came on from our cultivating emotional balance work. It's this genuine happiness, or um, and it looks different for everybody, right? Like it should look different for all of us, but um, we get to do that if we engage in this work. It's not like we have to, because for me, it's like, oh, I'm everything becomes a have to. Well, I have to do this and I have to do that. And I'm a drug addict, so I have to do this now. And I'm a Buddhist and I have to do that. I don't have to do any of this shit. I get to do this. I get to do this stuff. A lot of people don't get to do this. Most people who have addiction, a huge percentage of them never even get to do this. And I think that taking it from the view of this kind of grim Vipassana suffering business to an optimistic perspective of like, oh wow, like this is really fucking hard. And I don't like a lot of it, but I get to move through the world finally in a way that feels supportive, that feels in line with my vision and my sense of meaning and purpose. And so I don't want to promote the class too much, because the part of the reason I want to do is to tell you about this, and we can talk about it now. I'll stop talking and take some questions, but this has been, this is basically what I've done fucking since last March. So it's hard to kind of funnel it through a 35-minute talk. But I think that I politely tried to step away from the Buddhist recovery world a couple years ago, 4 years ago or so. But because of the current state of it, and also honestly the fact that a lot of people were really kind of trying to get me to do something for it, I created this course and this framework, and thinking about this stuff for years, and I feel like, why do y'all just cheat off my homework? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to go through these like old annoying Buddhist texts and try to come to terms with this stuff. So it's kind of a offering that way. And the cool thing about the class, I hope, is that it's open-ended. It never ends. That's why I wanted to do something that was subscription based. With a link there, you can sign up for the year and get a big discount, or you can just sign up monthly and it's $40 a month, and you get all the content, all the class stuff. You get weekly Zoom meetings, and they're recorded, so if you miss it, you can listen to it later. And it just goes on and on. So you do it for a couple months, and maybe you stop, you pick it back up. But it also gives me something to focus on for the next year, and stuff will get added to it. So it's kind of a big experiment. I'm mostly curious to see where it goes, but there's already been quite a few people enrolled. And so like if the class gets to 100 people, which I think it's almost there, what I'll do is I'll add a night. And then if it gets to another, so in an ideal world, it'd be great if there was like, there'd be a class at every night of the week. And, when it gets to be that big, I'll have different people that I know, that I've studied and trained with, who can lead it. And then hopefully, ultimately, we could get to a point where we could actually do it like live, like in a room, like on a retreat, which probably will happen eventually. So yeah, that's what I've been up to for a while now.
The Buddha's enlightenment was his awakening, his understanding, his insight into the ultimate life.
People don't have to do what I did. They don't have to spend 25 years reading these old Buddhist texts and trying to come to terms with this stuff. I think you might as well cheat off my homework.
Yeah.
And, so what I've done is I've laid out the early teachings in a very pragmatic way, a very practical way, where people there's videos that they can watch, there's hours of videos, there's teachings to read, there's guided meditations. It's all in there. You get access to the class. It's a subscription based, and you get the whole thing at once. You can go in there, and then every week I get on the Zoom for an hour, and I pick a piece out of the course and I talk about it. We do some meditation, and then we discuss it.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a really good idea to do this. Maybe this is what the Buddhist recovery community needs, is a new take on this, a new sort of online tool. I think it's a good idea. The more I think about it, the more I think this is what's kind of needed, a little bit more focus.
Buddha's enlightenment was his awakening, his understanding, his insight into the ultimate life. That's what most people talk about.
The truth ain't hard to see. It's all around. It's everything. There's breath inside of me. Question everything I once believed. Question everything so I can't see the story's just a dream. Don't ever stop. Don't ever cease Another ghost story and a masterpiece. The truth ain't hard to see. It's all around. It's everything. This breath inside of me. Question everything I once believed. Question everything so I can see the fiction and the fantasy. Don't ever stop. Don't ever cease. Keeps lying to me. It's a ghost story and a masterpiece. The truth ain't hard to see.
This is all part of the conditioned realm.
I'm out on request, I'm on the run. My mind's going off like a loaded gun, going down like the setting sun. And I'm riding on, and I'm riding on. I'm taking my days one by one. I ain't got no hate in my broken heart for no one. In the horizon of this moment I just begun. I keep finding all the answers when the questions won't come. Never scared to walk away. Never feel like I'm getting old or starting to decay. And I found my saving grace. Never take refuge when it demands a leap of faith. And I'm walking on down the line for the first and the last fucking time. Never hit rewind, abandoning the stories in my mind. Abandoning, destroying all the stories in my mind.
The definition of awakening is to be awake to these four truths.
The truth ain't hard to see. It's all around. It's everything. This breath inside of me. Question everything I once believed. Question everything so I can't see the story's just a dream. Don't ever stop. Don't ever cease. Keeps lying to me. Another ghost story and a masterpiece. The truth ain't hard to see. It's all around. It's everything. This breath inside of me. Question everything I once believed. Question everything so I can see the fiction and the fantasy. Don't ever stop. Don't ever cease. Keeps lying to me. It's a ghost story and a masterpiece. The truth ain't hard to see.
Self-protection twisted through the distorted lens of ignorance and fear.
It's my last attempt, it's my last run. The only reason left, I don't trust anyone. And I know I gotta rise above. So much work to be done, and it's only just begun. Recognize and defy all the lies that I face. Accomplish every single task that stands in my way. Realize